At 8 weeks pregnant, my husband texted me the number of a clinic and told me to take care of the problem before it complicated his promotion. An hour later, his mother unlocked my front door with a key I never knew she had. She set an empty suitcase beside my feet and said Mason needs a wife who can help him move forward, not a woman who traps him with a baby. By noon, I was bleeding in the restroom of the hospital where he worked. Mason looked at my shaking hands and said, "Don't turn this into a scene." Then he walked away to meet the woman he had chosen to replace me. I thought the worst thing I would learn that day was that my marriage had been a lie. I was wrong. Because after the ultrasound, Dr. Maya Chen locked the exam room door, looked me straight in the eyes and said, "Follow me. There is someone you need to know about, and you have to be the woman who ends this pattern." What waited behind that door was not another medical result. It was the face of a 4-year-old girl and a truth my husband had spent years teaching people not to see. My name is Evelyn Carter, though almost everyone who loves me calls me Evie. I was 31 years old when my husband decided my pregnancy had arrived at an inconvenient time in his career. Before that Tuesday, I thought I understood inconvenience. An overdue invoice was inconvenient. A broken water heater in February was inconvenient. A grocery delivery left on the neighbor's porch was inconvenient. A baby was not inconvenient. A baby was a heartbeat we had listened to together in a dark room, while Mason squeezed my fingers and whispered, "That's ours." At least that was what I believed. We lived in a 2-bedroom bungalow in West Asheville, North Carolina, on a street where the houses were close enough that you could smell what your neighbors were grilling and hear their dogs bark at the mail truck every afternoon. The house was not grand. It had squeaky oak floors, a narrow kitchen, and a back porch that tilted slightly toward the yard. Mason called it a starter home. I called it the first place I had ever chosen every detail of. I had picked the faded blue for the kitchen cabinets. I had sanded the old dining table myself. My father had spent 3 Saturdays repairing the porch rail, and my mother had planted rosemary beside the back steps because she said every home should have something growing near the door. The down payment had come partly from Mason's savings and partly from the money I had earned over 6 years as a freelance recipe developer and food photographer. I wrote recipes for small magazines, restaurant websites, meal kit companies, and anyone else willing to pay me to make ordinary food sound like something a tired person might still want to cook after work. It was not glamorous, but it was mine. I worked from the dining table where one corner was permanently occupied by camera lenses, notebooks, and a flour-dusted wooden board I used for photographs. That morning, I was editing a collection of family recipes for a publisher in Charlotte. The working title was Sunday Food, though most of the recipes had been tested on weekdays because real families rarely waited until Sunday to need comfort. The house smelled like coffee and cinnamon toast. Morning light came through the kitchen window in a pale rectangle and landed across the page where I had written my mother's chicken and dumplings recipe for the 3rd time. Mason had left before 7 wearing the charcoal jacket he saved for important meetings. He was the director of community clinic operations and partnerships for Blue Ridge Regional Health, a hospital network that had recently begun building neighborhood clinics across western North Carolina. His job sat between fundraising and operations donor dinners, neighborhood clinic launches, vendor meetings, outreach teams, and convincing powerful people that whatever the hospital wanted next had been their idea all along. He was good at it. Mason could walk into a room and make the most powerful person there feel privately understood. He remembered spouses' names, children's colleges, golf handicaps, food allergies. He knew when to lean in, when to laugh, and when to lower his voice so that ordinary information sounded confidential. When we first met at a fall festival in Hendersonville, he had asked me about my work and listened as if the difference between braising and stewing might change his life. I mistook attention for kindness. I would learn later that Mason paid attention the way other people studied maps. He was always locating the next useful road. At 8:17 that morning, he texted me, "We need to talk before lunch. Don't leave the house." No heart, no love you, no question about whether I had slept well or whether the nausea had eased. Just an instruction. I stared at the message for a moment, then typed, "Is everything okay?" The three dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. "Just stay there." That was the first moment something inside me shifted. Not broke, not yet. Shifted. Mason had been distant for weeks. But distance has a way of disguising itself when you love someone. I had blamed his schedule, the clinic project, the donor dinner he kept mentioning. He came home late and ate standing at the counter. He took his phone into the shower. He stopped touching the small of my back when he passed behind me in the kitchen. At his mother's birthday dinner, he had corrected me 3 times in front of everyone, once about the date of a fundraiser, once about the cost of our new refrigerator, and once about how tired I claimed to be. His mother, Diane, had smiled into her wine glass. "Pregnancy can make women dramatic," she said. "I worked until the day Mason was born. I had laughed because everyone else did." That is one of the small humiliations people rarely talk about, the moment you help make your own pain easier for everyone else to swallow. At 9:03, a dark sedan pulled up in front of the house. A man I had never met climbed out carrying a document envelope. He wore a navy raincoat despite the clear sky. When I opened the door, he confirmed my name, handed me the envelope, and asked me to sign a small electronic screen. "What is this?" I asked. "I'm only authorized to deliver it." His voice was not unkind, it was simply empty of involvement. I signed. The envelope contained a separation agreement, a proposed schedule for selling the house, and a letter from an attorney explaining that Mason intended to dissolve the marriage. The first page said irreconcilable differences. The second said Mason would continue paying the mortgage for 60 days if I vacated the home immediately. The third referred to the pregnancy issue without using the word baby. I read that line twice. Pregnancy issue. As if our child were a stain spreading through paperwork. My phone rang before I reached the next page. "Mason." I answered so quickly I nearly dropped it. "What is this?" He exhaled, not surprised, not ashamed, irritated. "I was hoping you'd read everything before calling. You had a stranger bring divorce papers to our house." "Separation papers," he corrected. "We don't need to make this more emotional than it already is." I gripped the edge of the table. "I'm pregnant." "I'm aware." The way he said it made the room feel smaller. "Mason," we heard the heartbeat together. There was a pause. In the background, I could hear the muted sounds of his office phone's footsteps, a printer. Then he said, "That doesn't mean we have to continue down a road that makes no sense." For several seconds, I could not understand the sentence. The words were ordinary. The meaning was not. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying you're 8 weeks. You still have options." My hand moved to my stomach without thought. He continued in the calm, reasonable tone he used with donors who had changed their minds. "There's a clinic on Merriman Avenue. They're discreet. I sent you the number." I looked at the text thread. Beneath his last message was a new one containing a phone number. "You want me to end the pregnancy? I want you to think about what kind of life you're creating. For yourself and for me. For you, my career is at a very sensitive point. The Whitaker family is funding the new Women's Health Center. Frank Whitaker is considering me for Vice President of Development. This is not the time for a hostile divorce and a custody situation." The Whitaker name had floated through our home for months. Frank Whitaker owned a chain of senior living communities and chaired the hospital foundation. His daughter Sloane ran the family's charitable projects. Mason had described her as sharp, demanding, impossible to impress. He had never described her as the woman he was sleeping with. "Not yet." "You filed for separation," I said. "You created the hostile divorce." "I created a clean exit." The words were so polished they sounded rehearsed. A clean exit from me, from a situation that isn't working. And the baby, another pause. The baby makes everything harder. There are sentences that hurt because they are cruel. There are others that hurt because the person saying them believes cruelty is simply efficiency. I whispered, "You wanted this baby." I wanted the idea of a family when the timing was different. "What changed?" He did not answer directly. Instead, he said, "Diane is coming over. She'll help you pack enough for a few days. Stay with your parents. Read the agreement. Call the clinic. We can discuss the rest after you've calmed down." He ended the call. I stood in the kitchen holding the phone to my ear long after the line went silent. The coffee had cooled. The toast had gone hard at the edges. On my laptop, a photograph of chicken and dumplings filled the screen, warm and golden, and completely unrelated to the life I was suddenly standing inside. At 9:41, the front lock turned. I froze. The door opened and Diane Reed walked into my house carrying an empty suitcase. She was 58, tall and narrow, with silver blonde hair she had cut every 6 weeks and a wardrobe built around soft gray, navy, and cream. She never raised her voice. Diane did not need volume. She had mastered the art of making judgment sound like practical advice. I stared at the key in her hand. "How did you get in?" "Mason gave me a spare months ago. He never told me. He didn't think it was necessary." She set the suitcase near the stairs and looked around the room. Her eyes moved over the sofa, the framed wedding photograph, the basket of baby name books beside the fireplace. She did not look at me. "Did you know?" I asked. "About the separation, yes. How long?" "Mason has been unhappy for quite some time." "That isn't what I asked." Diane finally met my eyes. "Several weeks?" "Several weeks. While she drank tea at my table. While she asked whether we had chosen a nursery color. While she sent me a link to a stroller she said was too expensive but probably worth it." "You knew he planned to throw me out while I'm pregnant." "No one is throwing you out. He is giving you time to make arrangements. This is my house too." Diane's mouth tightened by a fraction. "Evie Mason found the house. Mason qualified for the mortgage. Mason's name carries the insurance and most of the bills. You chose paint colors." My father had repaired the porch. My mother had planted the garden. I had paid $27,000 toward the down payment and every grocery bill for 2 years. But in Diane's version, I had chosen paint colors. She stepped closer. "I know this feels sudden to you. It is not sudden to him. He told me to have an abortion." She did not flinch. "He told you to consider what is realistic." "You're talking about your grandchild." Diane glanced toward the window. "Mason needs a wife who can stand beside him in the life he is building. He cannot be tied to someone who turns every difficult decision into a moral emergency." For 1 second I saw the whole arrangement clearly. Mason had not merely told his mother. He had recruited her. She had accepted the role without hesitation. "Is there someone else?" I asked. Diane's silence answered first. Then she said, "There is someone better suited to where his life is going." My knees weakened. "Sloane Whitaker." Her eyes shifted back to mine. That was enough. I sat down because standing had become uncertain. Diane remained near the stairs, one hand resting on the suitcase handle. "She understands his work," she said. "She understands pressure. She comes from a family that values ambition. And I don't." "You work from a dining table taking pictures of soup." The words landed more cleanly than shouting would have. I thought about the years I had supported Mason through graduate school. The months I paid the mortgage while he changed jobs, the donor events where I stood beside him in a dress I could barely afford, and remembered every name he whispered before we entered the room. I thought about the night he had practiced his first major speech in our kitchen while I timed him with my phone and rewrote the ending because he said mine sounded warmer. I thought about all the invisible labor that becomes invisible precisely because someone is benefiting from it. Diane nodded toward the suitcase. "Pack what you need. Mason would prefer the house empty when he gets home." What Mason prefers no longer interests me. It was the first strong sentence I had spoken all morning. Diane studied me surprised but not impressed. "Don't make this ugly, Evie." I looked at the separation agreement on the table, then at the empty suitcase she had brought into my home. I didn't bring ugliness into this house. For the first time, something like irritation crossed her face. She picked up her purse. "You have until 6. Then she walked out, leaving the suitcase behind as if it belonged there. I did not pack immediately. I went upstairs and stood in the doorway of the small room we had planned to use as a nursery. There was no crib yet, no paint, just a folded drop cloth, 2 boxes of Mason's college books, and a narrow window looking toward the maple tree in the yard. On the floor was a tiny pair of white socks my mother had bought after the first ultrasound. I picked them up. That was when the first pain came. It tightened low across my abdomen, sharp enough to make me grip the doorframe. I told myself it was stress. I told myself to breathe. I told myself not to panic because panic was what everyone had already decided I did. Then I felt warmth. In the bathroom, I saw blood. Not much. Enough! I called Mason first. He answered on the fourth ring. I'm bleeding, I said. Silence. Then how much? I don't know. I'm scared. Call your doctor. I need you to come home. I'm walking into a meeting. Mason. Evie, don't turn this into a scene. The line went dead. I called my mother next, but she was in the basement stockroom of Carter Hardware and Garden, where cell service had always been unreliable. I left a message I barely remember. Then I grabbed my purse, the separation papers, and the tiny white socks. I drove myself to Blue Ridge Regional Medical Center with both hands locked around the steering wheel and every traffic light taking longer than any traffic light had ever taken before. At the emergency entrance, a volunteer brought me a wheelchair. As they pushed me through the lobby, I saw Mason through the glass doors of the Foundation conference room. He was standing beside Sloane Whitaker. She wore a green dress and had one hand on his sleeve. He leaned close to say something that made her smile. For one impossible second, the entire hospital seemed to hold still around them. Then Mason looked up and saw me. His face did not show fear for the baby. It showed annoyance that I had arrived where I could be seen. He came into the hallway while the nurse was asking me questions. What are you doing here? He said quietly. I stared at him. I'm bleeding. Sloane stood several feet behind him watching. Mason lowered his voice further. You should have called your OB's office. I called you. I told you I was in a meeting. The nurse looked between us. Sir, we need to take her back. Mason stepped away. Fine. Go with them. Text me when you know something. He turned back toward Sloane. I watched him walk away while a stranger wheeled me toward the elevators. That was the moment I stopped asking whether my marriage could be saved. I only did not know yet how much of myself I would have to save with it. The maternity assessment unit was on the fourth floor, past a set of doors that opened with a soft electronic click. The nurse who took me there introduced herself as Jasmine Alvarez. She looked to be in her early 40s with dark hair pulled into a low bun and the calm, direct manner of someone who had learned that frightened people did not need more fear added to the room. She helped me onto the bed, handed me a gown, and asked practical questions. How far along was I? 8 weeks and 3 days. How long had I been bleeding? Less than an hour. Any severe cramping? Some. Had I experienced a recent shock or unusual stress? I looked at the separation papers still clutched in my hand. Yes, I said. Jasmine glanced at the envelope, but did not ask me to explain. She placed it on the side table and covered it with the tiny white socks which had somehow stayed in my grip all the way from home. That small gesture nearly broke me. Not because it was dramatic, because it was careful. All morning, the people who claimed to know me had treated my pain as an inconvenience. A nurse who had met me 4 minutes earlier protected 2 baby socks from being crushed beneath a legal envelope. A few minutes later, a physician entered. Dr. Maya Chen was in her late 40s, petite with short black hair and rectangular glasses. She introduced herself, reviewed the chart, and said she wanted to perform an ultrasound. Her voice was efficient without being cold. First we check the pregnancy, she said. Everything else can wait. The room darkened. Gel touched my skin. The screen turned gray and black. I stared at Dr. Chen's face because I was afraid to look at the monitor. She moved the wand, slowly clicked twice, adjusted something, then reached for the volume. A fast, steady sound filled the room. My baby's heartbeat. I covered my mouth. Dr. Chen turned the screen slightly toward me. There she said. Strong cardiac activity. The pregnancy is in the right place. The bleeding appears limited. We'll monitor you, but at this moment your baby is holding on. Your baby is holding on. I cried then, not loudly. There was no dramatic collapse. Tears simply ran into my hair while I listened to that quick, determined rhythm. Jasmine placed a tissue in my hand and remained near my shoulder. Dr. Chen printed 2 images. She handed me one and slipped the other inside the folder on the side table. I noticed that. She had seen what the folder was, or at least guessed. She placed the ultrasound picture inside it, as if reminding the paper what it had tried to reduce to a phrase. Pregnancy issue. No. A child. A heartbeat. A life already resisting the plans made around it. They admitted me overnight because the cramping continued and my blood pressure stayed high. Jasmine brought water crackers and a warm blanket. Dr. Chen returned before the end of her shift and asked whether there was anyone she should call. My parents, I said. Would you like to call them or would you like me to? I tried my mother again. This time she answered on the first ring. Evie. I heard the hardware store around her, the bell above the front door, a cart rolling across concrete, my father calling to someone about a bag of mulch. Mom. That one word was enough. Her voice changed immediately. Where are you? At Blue Ridge. Are you hurt? I'm pregnant. I'm bleeding. Mason. My throat closed. We're coming, she said. We're leaving now. She did not ask whether I wanted them. She knew. My parents arrived 37 minutes later. My father, Ron Carter, was 61 and built like a man who had spent most of his life lifting things other people thought required a second person. He still wore his green Carter hardware work shirt, the name patch crooked over the pocket. My mother Linda came in behind him, carrying my old denim jacket, a paper bag of food, and the expression she wore whenever someone she loved had been hurt, and she was deciding which part of the situation could be fixed first. Dad crossed the room in 3 steps. He put one hand on the back of my head and pressed his forehead to mine. You okay, Bug? He had called me Bug since I was 5 because I used to collect ladybugs in a jelly jar. Mason hated the nickname. He said it made me sound childish. Hearing it in that hospital room felt like someone had returned my real name. The baby is okay, I said. Dad closed his eyes for 1 second. Good. Mom put the food on the table, removed the separation papers from beneath the ultrasound photo, and read the first page. I watched her face. She did not gasp. She did not curse. She simply sat down and kept reading until she reached the paragraph about the pregnancy. Then she lifted her eyes. He sent this today. Yes. And his mother came into the house. Yes. With a suitcase. Yes. Mom folded the papers once very carefully. Where is Mason now? Dad asked. In the building. Dad turned toward the door. Ron, Mom said. He stopped. She did not tell him to calm down. She knew better than to insult him with that. She only said Evie needs us here. Dad looked at me, then back at the door. He returned to the chair. That choice mattered more than any confrontation he could have had in the hallway. Mason did not visit. At 6:12 that evening, he sent a text. Heard things are stable. We should avoid unnecessary contact tonight. Please have your parents collect your belongings. I read it twice. Then another message arrived. Also, do not involve my workplace in our private situation. Not how are you. Not is the baby safe. Not I am sorry. Protect my workplace. Protect my reputation. Protect the future I have chosen. My father saw my face. What did he say? I handed him the phone. Dad read the messages and gave the phone back without comment. He stood open the paper bag Mom had brought and arranged a turkey sandwich, apple slices, and crackers on the rolling table. Eat, he said. That was my father's language when words were too small. Mom stayed until after midnight. Dad slept in the chair until Jasmine made him unfold the recliner. They did not discuss strategy. They did not ask how I had missed the signs. They did not tell me what they would do in my place. They stayed. Around 2 in the morning, I woke to the low blue light of the monitor and saw Dad sitting upright, half asleep, one hand still resting on the edge of the bed. I thought then about the difference between people who say they love you and people who arrange their bodies around your pain so you do not have to be alone with it. The bleeding stopped by morning, but Dr. Chen wanted to keep me another day. She said my blood pressure and stress level needed time to settle. Mason sent no further messages. Diane sent one. This is exactly the kind of escalation Mason was afraid of. Please be reasonable. I did not respond. Later that afternoon, Mom went home to pack clothes for me. Dad returned to the store for a few hours because a delivery truck had arrived with half the order missing. Jasmine brought tea and stood near the window while I drank it. You don't have to answer this, she said. But is Mason Reed your husband? I looked up. Yes. Her expression changed so slightly, I might have missed it if I had not spent the previous 24 hours studying every face around me for danger. You know him. I know who he is. The answer was careful. Before I could ask more, Dr. Chen entered. She reviewed my chart, checked the baby again, and said everything remained stable. Then she looked at Jasmine. Something passed between them. Jasmine left the room and closed the door. Dr. Chen pulled the visitor's chair close to the bed. Evie, she said, I'm going to ask you a personal question. You may tell me it is none of my business. All right. Did your husband ask you to terminate this pregnancy? The directness of it made lying impossible. Yes. Did he do that before or after he filed for separation? The same morning. And did he tell you there was another woman? His mother did, Sloane Whitaker. Dr. Chen removed her glasses and folded them in her lap. She was quiet long enough that I heard a cart roll past in the hallway. Then she said, I have worked in this hospital for 14 years. Mason has worked here for 3. During that time, I have seen him build trust quickly, attach himself to people with influence, and punish anyone who makes him look less competent than he wants to appear. I said nothing. She continued. 2 outreach coordinators filed complaints after he blamed them for problems with a community clinic launch he had mishandled. 1 transferred. 1 left the network. I filed a statement because I witnessed part of what happened. The complaint was closed after Mason said there had been a misunderstanding. Why are you telling me this? Because your husband is not merely leaving a marriage. He is creating a version of events in which you caused the collapse and he escaped it. My skin went cold. How do you know? Dr. Chen looked toward the door, then back at me. Because I have heard a version of this before. She stood. Can you walk? Yes. Then follow me. I hesitated. Where? To a private consultation room. A nurse who saw what happened in the hallway asked permission to tell you something. You can say no at any point. Dr. Chen helped me into a robe and waited while I pulled on hospital socks. We moved slowly past the nurses' station and into a quieter corridor near the social work offices. Jasmine stood outside a small room with frosted glass. Inside, there was no waiting stranger and no dramatic files spread across a table. Just 3 chairs, a box of tissues, and a paper cup of water. Jasmine closed the door. My sister dated Mason before he came to Asheville, she said. She was with him almost 4 years. The words did not make sense at first. Jasmine continued carefully. He left her 3 weeks before he moved here. 6 weeks later, she learned she was pregnant. My hand moved to my stomach. Did he know? Yes. Did he help her? No. Jasmine looked down at her hands. Their daughter is 4. Her name is Lily. Mason has never met her. I stared at the water cup because the room had begun to tilt. Diane's suitcase. Mason's clinic number. The way both of them spoke as if a child were damaged that could be managed. It was not new language. It was a family language. Why are you telling me now? I asked. Because I recognized your last name when I saw your chart at the nurse's station. I did not open anything I was not assigned to see. I heard Mason call you his wife in the hallway. Then I watched him tell you not to make a scene while you were bleeding. Her voice tightened for the first time. My sister spent years thinking she was the only woman he had erased this way. Dr. Chen remained near the door. She has not shared your medical information with anyone, she said. Jasmine asked whether she could give you her sister's number. That choice is yours. Jasmine held out a folded piece of paper. Olivia does not want to tell you what to do. She only said that if Mason is building a story about you, you should know he has done it before. I did not take the paper immediately. What story did he build about her? That she was unstable, that she wanted to ruin his future, that the pregnancy was a trap. The exact words were different, the shape was not. I took the number. Dr. Chen pulled a chair closer and sat across from me. I can document your condition and what you reported today, she said. Jasmine can document what she personally witnessed. Olivia can decide what she is willing to share. None of us can choose your next step. She looked directly at me. You have to be the person who ends this pattern in your own life. That evening after my parents had gone home to sleep, I called Olivia. A child was talking in the background when she answered. Olivia asked for a minute, and I heard a door close softly. I am sorry, she said. Lily negotiates bedtime like a union representative. It was such an ordinary sentence that it almost undid me. Mason's hidden child was not an accusation or a piece of evidence. She was a little girl avoiding sleep. Olivia told me enough to make the pattern visible 4 years together, a move planned in secret, a phone call ending everything a pregnancy he called hers to handle, and Diane arriving months later with a statement and a cashier's check. She did not send photographs. She did not ask me to believe every detail that night. "I can meet you when you leave the hospital," she said. "You can see what I kept and decide for yourself." Before we ended the call, she said, "You are not the first woman he tried to make disappear, but you do not have to let him finish writing your part." That night I slept for almost 6 hours. When I woke, something had changed. I was still hurt, still frightened, still carrying a child whose father had called her a complication. But confusion had loosened its grip. By morning, I had stopped asking why Mason had done this long enough to ask a more useful question. What was true, and what did I need to protect? Dr. Chen discharged me just after noon. She gave me instructions about rest, hydration, and warning signs. Then she wrote her direct office number on the back of a hospital card. "Call for medical reasons," she said, "and call if you need someone to remind you that what happened was real." Jasmine walked me to the elevator. My parents were waiting in the lobby, but before we reached them, I stopped. "I need to go back to the house," I said. Jasmine studied my face. "Today, Mason is at the foundation luncheon until 4. I need my computer, my work drives, and the rest of my clothes. And something else." "Yes." She nodded as if she already knew. "Do not go alone." My father came with me. He did not ask what I expected to find. He simply drove his old Ford pickup behind my car and parked across the driveway while I unlocked the front door. The house looked exactly the way it had before my life changed. The blanket was still folded over the sofa. A coffee ring marked the kitchen counter. Diane's empty suitcase stood near the stairs. Dad saw it. He said his jaw but said nothing. "I need about an hour," I told him. "I'll be on the porch." "Dad, I'm not going through his things. I'm making sure nobody walks in on you." That was another form of love protection without taking away my agency. Upstairs, I packed clothes, toiletries, prenatal vitamins, my camera equipment, and the box containing my grandmother's dishes. I collected my recipe notebooks and the external drive that held 6 years of work. Then I sat at the desk in the spare room. Mason's laptop was closed in the center, but our shared household tablet lay beside it. We used it for grocery lists, utility bills, travel confirmations, and the family calendar. My fingerprint still opened it. The first thing I saw was a calendar invitation for Lisbon departing 3 weeks later. 2 travelers, Mason Reed and Sloan Whitaker. The note said, "After announcement. Keep photos private until filing is complete." I took a picture with my phone. A bank alert appeared at the top of the screen before I could close the calendar. A transfer of $72,000 from our joint savings had been scheduled for Friday. The destination was an account I did not recognize. I called the bank. Because my name was on the account, the representative placed a temporary hold until both owners appeared in person. Mason had not left a note explaining his intentions. He had not needed to. The amount, the timing, and the secret account said enough. The tablet also remained signed into the family photo sharing app. A new album had been created 3 days earlier, Foundation Future. Most of the photographs were harmless clinic renderings, table arrangements, Sloan standing beside her father. Then I found one taken in my kitchen. Sloan held the mug my mother had given me, and Mason stood behind her with one hand at her waist. The date was Thanksgiving afternoon. That day returned to me with painful clarity. I had spent the morning at Diane's house cooking for 12 people because Diane said my food photographs made me the family expert. Mason had kissed my forehead, announced a donor emergency, and driven back to Asheville. At dinner, Diane seated me near the folding card table with 2 distant cousins. When everyone gathered for photographs, she handed me 6 phones and said, "Evie, you are so much better with cameras." I had taken picture after picture of the Reed family without appearing in a single one. Claire had looked at me once over Diane's shoulder. She knew it was wrong. Then she smiled for the camera anyway. While I was making his family look complete, Mason had brought Sloan into our home. I photographed the image and closed the app. I did not find a secret folder conveniently explaining every betrayal. Real deception was messier than that. It lived across small systems. People assumed no one else would connect a travel note, a bank alert, a photograph with the wrong date, a family that had begun practicing my absence. I carried the tablet downstairs. Dad was still on the porch, sitting on the top step with his elbows on his knees. I need 5 more minutes, I said. He looked at my face, then at the tablet. All right. In the kitchen, I removed the framed wedding photograph from the shelf because the frame had belonged to my grandmother. I slid the picture out and left it face down on the counter. I did not tear it. I did not need a gesture large enough for Mason to notice. Before I left, I opened the junk drawer and found the spare key Diane had used. Mason had labeled it Mom in black marker. I placed it on top of the separation agreement. Then I carried my grandmother's empty frame to the door. Dad took the box of dishes from my arms. You get what you needed, enough to stop doubting myself. I locked the door behind us. This time the click did not sound like exile. It sounded like a boundary. I moved into the small apartment above Carter Hardware and Garden that evening. Calling it an apartment was generous. It had once been my grandfather's office before my parents added a shower, a narrow kitchen, and enough insulation to make the winter bearable. For years, they rented it to seasonal employees and cousins between leases. The bedroom ceiling sloped under the roof. The stove had 2 burners. The living room window overlooked the garden center, where rows of clay pots and bags of soil sat beneath strings of yellow work lights. It was not the home I had planned. It was the first place I felt safe. Mom stocked the refrigerator with eggs, soup fruit, and a casserole she pretended had simply appeared there. Dad carried my boxes upstairs without allowing me to lift anything heavier than a pillow. When he finished, he checked the lock twice and left a new flashlight on the counter. Power flickers in storms, he said. Then he looked around as if assessing whether the walls were strong enough to hold me. They are, I told him. He knew I was not talking about the walls. That night, rain tapped softly against the roof. I sat on the edge of the bed with the external drive beside me and my phone in my hand. Olivia's number waited in my contacts. I did not call. Not yet. I needed a few hours in which no new truth entered the room. Instead, I opened social media. That was a mistake, though perhaps a necessary one. Diane had posted photographs from a hospital foundation luncheon that afternoon. Mason stood beside Sloan and Frank Whitaker under a banner announcing the new Blue Ridge Women's Health Center. In one photograph, Sloan's hand rested at Mason's back. In another, Diane stood beside them, smiling. The caption read, "Proud of this remarkable team and the future they are building for women and families across our community." Women and families. While I had been upstairs in the same hospital praying not to lose his child. Beneath the post, Mason's sister had commented with 3 heart emojis. A cousin wrote, "Finally big things ahead." Finally. The word told me they knew. Maybe not everything. Maybe only the version Mason had offered. But they knew enough to celebrate the next woman before anyone had told me my marriage was over. I took screenshots, then logged out. At 11:38, my phone rang from an unknown number. I nearly ignored it. Then I thought of Olivia. "Hello? Evie, it's Olivia." Her voice sounded different without the video delay, warmer, more tired human in a way the screen had flattened. "I'm sorry it's late," she said. Lily had trouble settling down. "It's okay. I wanted to make sure you were somewhere safe. I'm above my parents' store." "That sounds good." I looked through the window at the dark outlines of wheelbarrows and tomato cages below. "It is." We were quiet for a moment. Then she asked, "Did you find anything?" I told her about the photographs, the scheduled transfer, the draft emails, and the recording. She did not sound surprised. That frightened me more than surprise would have. "He recorded me too," she said. "When?" "The night I told him I might be pregnant." I was crying because I was scared. Months later, a mutual friend said Mason had played part of it for people and told them I was obsessed with him. I closed my eyes. "He uses tenderness as evidence," I said. "Yes." The sentence stayed between us. Olivia asked whether I could meet the next morning. She wanted to give me copies of what she had kept. We chose the Bluebird Diner near the community college, a place my parents sometimes visited after early Sunday inventory. Before we hung up, I asked the question that had been pressing against me since the hospital. "Why did you wait until now?" Olivia breathed out slowly. "Because for 4 years I told myself that staying away from Mason was the healthiest thing I could do. And it was for me." But when Jasmine called and said a pregnant woman had arrived bleeding after Mason served her separation papers, I realized my silence had become useful to him. She paused. I don't owe him silence just because I survived him. I lay awake after the call thinking about that. Silence can be dignity. Silence can also be shelter for the person who caused the harm. The difference depends on who benefits from it. Morning arrived gray and damp. I dressed in jeans, a navy sweater, and the only coat I had packed. Mom was already downstairs opening the store when I came through the back stairwell. Carter Hardware and Garden had been in my family for 38 years. The front half sold screws, paint, plumbing, parts, birdseed garden gloves, and the thousand small objects people only notice when something breaks. The back half held lumber, fertilizer, seasonal plants, and an old wooden counter worn smooth by elbows. The store smelled like cedar soil, motor oil, and coffee. It smelled like competence. Dad stood beside the register, explaining to a customer why a cheap faucet valve would cost more in the long run. Mom was on a stepladder, changing the handwritten sign above the seed display. Both looked at me when I entered. I'm meeting Olivia, I said. Mom climbed down. Do you want me to come? No, but thank you. Dad put the valve on the counter. Call when you get there, call when you leave. I will. He nodded and returned to the customer. No lecture, no command. Just a line connecting me to home. The Bluebird Diner had red vinyl booths, laminated menus, and coffee strong enough to remove paint. Olivia sat in the back with a thick envelope beside her purse. She wore a beige cardigan and no makeup. She looked younger than she had on the screen until she looked directly at me. Then I saw the years in her eyes, not age exactly, but the weight of having learned something too early and carried it alone. We greeted each other awkwardly. There is no ordinary way to meet the woman whose life might be an earlier draft of your own. A waitress poured coffee before either of us asked. Olivia wrapped both hands around the mug. I brought everything I could find. She opened the envelope. The first photographs were ordinary. Mason at a cookout, younger and thinner, laughing beside Olivia. Mason assembling a bookshelf in their apartment. Mason at Olivia's college graduation, one hand at her waist. Mason holding a birthday cake while she leaned toward the candles. The pictures hurt because they did not look like evidence. They looked like a life. He was good for most of it, Olivia said, watching me study them. Or I thought he was. That's what makes people like Mason difficult to explain. If he had been cruel every day, I would have left. He was generous when generosity made him feel admired, attentive when attention gained trust. He could make a Tuesday night dinner feel like a promise. I understood. The next pages were printed messages. Mason telling Olivia he could not imagine his future without her. Mason asking her to proofread job applications. Mason promising they would look at houses after he finished school. Then gradually the tone changed. You are putting too much pressure on me. This is not the time for emotional demands. You knew my career had to come first. You are making me responsible for your anxiety. The final conversation lasted 27 minutes by phone. Olivia had written the length at the top of the page. He had already signed the lease in Asheville, she said. He had already applied for the hospital job. He had already met Diane twice to plan the move. I was the last person informed. The pattern tightened around me. What happened when you told him about Lily? Olivia slid another page across the table. It was a screenshot of the message Mason sent after their phone call. I acknowledge what you told me. I hope you make the decision that gives everyone the best chance to move forward. I cannot participate in this situation. The same phrase, move forward. Diane had used it. Mason used it. It was the family's clean word for leaving someone else beneath the wheels. Olivia placed a cream envelope on the table. Inside was a one-page statement declaring that she acknowledged Mason was not Lily's biological father and agreed never to make a claim against him. The signature line remained blank. Attached was a photocopy of a cashier's check for $15,000. Diane brought the original, Olivia said. She sat at my kitchen table and told me Mason had a future that could not survive a scandal. What did you say? I told her a child was not a scandal. Olivia's fingers tightened around the coffee mug. She said children become whatever adults allow them to become. I still don't know exactly what she meant. I only know I wanted her out of my house. Did she take the check? I put it back in the envelope and pushed it toward her. She left it on the table. The bank voided it later, but I kept the copy. Why? Because the next day, Mason called two friends and told them I had asked his mother for money. I stared at her. He reversed it. He always reverses it. That is what he does best. The waitress arrived with eggs and toast neither of us remembered ordering. We ate a few bites because the food was there. Olivia told me about Lily. She loved purple, hated peas, slept with a stuffed rabbit named Mayor, and believed every woman wearing a stethoscope was Jasmine. Olivia worked as a reading specialist at an elementary school. Her parents helped when they could. There had been hard years, but her life was not a tragedy. That mattered. Mason had left damage behind him, but he had not defined what grew afterward. There was another woman, Olivia said after a while. My fork stopped. Between you and me. Between me and Asheville. Her name was Hannah Brooks. Her father owned a bakery supply company in Charlotte. Mason dated her for about 5 months while he was interviewing for development jobs. She introduced him to Frank Whitaker at a charity golf event. And then, he stopped calling when the hospital offer came through. Was she pregnant? No, at least not that I know of. But he told people she was jealous and unstable after the breakup. Olivia gave a humorless smile. Apparently, every woman who stops being useful becomes unstable. I thought of Mason's text calling the bank hold proof of my instability. Even now, every boundary I set became evidence in the story he wanted to tell about me. How did you learn about Hannah? A mutual friend reached out after Lily was born. She thought I should know I wasn't the only one. Did you contact her? Once. She did not want involvement. I respected that. We sat in the diner for nearly 3 hours. Not all of it was evidence. Some of it was recognition. We compared small moments we had dismissed. Mason mocking the way we pronounced a word, then later using the correction in front of other people. Mason offering to handle shared bills, then acting as if financial knowledge belonged only to him. Mason praising independence until independence interfered with what he wanted. Diane inviting us to family events, but assigning us the work while family photographs happened without us. The similarities did not make me feel foolish. They made me feel less alone. Before we left, Olivia pushed the envelope toward me. Keep the copies. Are you sure? Yes. What do you want from this? She looked toward the window where rain had begun tracing thin lines down the glass. I want Lily to grow up knowing that being abandoned was something Mason did, not something she caused. Then she looked back at me. And I want your child to have a mother who was not successfully erased. Outside, we stood beneath the diner awning. I am sorry this happened to you, I said. I'm sorry it is happening to you. She hesitated, then hugged me. It was brief and careful, two strangers connected by the worst decision one man had made repeatedly. As I drove back to Hendersonville, rain blurred the mountains into gray shapes. The envelope rested on the passenger seat beside my phone. For the first time since the separation papers arrived, I knew exactly where I was going. Carter Hardware was busy when I returned. A Saturday crowd filled the aisles with wet coats and questions about sump pumps. Dad was cutting keys. Mom was helping an older woman compare weather stripping. I waited until closing. At 6, Dad turned the sign to closed. Mom locked the front door. The last employee left through the garden center. We sat in the break room behind the paint department where a scarred wooden table stood beneath a bulletin board covered in delivery schedules, birthday cards, and photographs of customers' finished projects. Mom made grilled cheese sandwiches. Dad poured coffee. Then I told them everything, not the shortened version. I began with the courier at the door and ended with Olivia under the diner awning. I told them about Diane's key, Mason's clinic number, the blood, the hospital hallway, Sloane's hand on his sleeve. I told them about Lily. I told them about the photographs in our house, the Lisbon tickets, the Reed family messages, the scheduled transfer, and the recording Mason had made while pretending to comfort me. Mom stopped eating when I described the recording. Dad did not move at all. When I finished, the refrigerator hummed behind us. Rain clicked against the metal roof. Dad looked down at his hands. They were rough and nicked from work, one thumbnail darkened by an old injury. Those hands had built shelves, repaired roofs, fixed lawnmowers, and held mine across every street I crossed as a child. He looked at me. Do you want help ending this? The question was simple. It did not assume I was helpless. It did not tell me what a strong woman should do. It asked what I wanted. Yes, I said. What does ending it mean to you? Mom asked. I thought carefully. I don't want a war that takes over my life. I don't want months of people talking about contracts and accounts until the baby becomes a footnote. I want the money protected. I want the house handled fairly. I want the truth about Lily and me to reach the people Mason is using, and I want him to stop telling everyone that I caused this. Dad nodded. You want your name back? The words landed exactly where they needed to. Yes. Dad stood and walked to the old wall phone beside the employee lockers. He still kept a paper address book in the drawer beneath it. Mom slid the grilled cheese closer to me. Eat while it is warm. Dad called Denise Harper, a family law attorney who had helped the store through a lease dispute years earlier. She worked above a pharmacy, wore reading glasses on a chain, and spoke in sentences that did not require translation. She met us the next morning before the store opened. I showed her the separation papers, the bank alert, the Lisbon reservation, the photograph from my kitchen, and Olivia's envelope from the diner. Denise did not treat my pain as evidence, and she did not treat the documents as the story. The story is that your husband prepared an exit before he spoke to you, she said. My job is to make sure preparation does not become permission. She gave me 4 instructions. Do not sign the agreement. Do not meet Mason alone. Keep copies of communications. Let the bank hold stand. That was most of the legal discussion I needed. Denise sent a short notice concerning the shared account and the house. No courtroom speech, no dramatic stack of filings, just a boundary around what Mason had assumed he could take. Dr. Chen provided a brief medical statement describing my condition and what I had reported when I arrived. Jasmine wrote down what she had personally seen in the hallway. Olivia kept control of her own evidence and her own decisions about Lily. The next several days were quiet in ways I had not expected. Mason called when the bank hold appeared. I let the first call go to voicemail. Evie, those funds are allocated for obligations you may not understand. Call me before you create a larger problem. 3 minutes later, he texted, This behavior is exactly why I have concerns about your stability. I sent the message to Denise. Her reply was simple. Do not argue with a story he is trying to record. So I did not. Instead, I went upstairs and tried to work. My camera stood on its tripod facing a bowl of white beans. The light through the garden center window was good, but my hands shook every time I adjusted the lens. After 20 minutes, I had taken 37 photographs and hated every one. Dad came up carrying a scrap of pale plywood. The counter downstairs is reflecting green, he said. I looked at him. He had no idea whether the counter was reflecting green. He leaned the plywood beside the bowl. It softened the shadow exactly the way I needed. Then he adjusted the curtain 2 inches and went back downstairs without asking whether I was all right. The next photograph was usable. Not beautiful, not yet. Usable was enough. The cookbook deadline had not vanished because my marriage had. I tested biscuits in Mom's kitchen. I rewrote an introduction about meals families return to after difficult days. The first version was sentimental. The second was angry. The third was plain enough to be true. Home was the place where your hunger was noticed without being used against you. On Thursday, Diane called. I did not answer. She left a voicemail. Evie, this situation is getting out of hand. Mason tells me you have involved outsiders and interfered with funds needed for the Lisbon event. I understand you are hurt, but there is no reason to punish everyone. We have loved you as family, and I hope you will remember that before you do something permanent. We have loved you as family. The phrase made me laugh once sharply. Family had become the word Diane used when she wanted access without accountability. She called again an hour later. This time her voice was less polished. Also, Olivia Grant has no place in your marriage. She made choices years ago and has spent years blaming Mason for them. Be very careful about allowing bitter women to direct your life. I forwarded both messages to Denise. Then I called Olivia. I thought you should know Diane mentioned you. Olivia was silent for a second. So Mason knows we spoke. Probably. How do you feel? I looked around the small apartment. A bowl of apples sat on the counter. My father's flashlight waited beside the door. From below came the rattle of the paint mixer. Less afraid than I expected. Good, she said. Fear is useful only until you know where the exits are. That afternoon, a florist delivered white lilies to Carter Hardware. The card read, "For the baby. Please choose peace, Diane." Mom read it, carried the flowers to the dumpster behind the garden center, and returned without comment. "Mom," I said. She wiped her hands on her apron. "Those flowers are toxic to cats, and I don't trust the message." We did not own a cat. I hugged her anyway. The most important meeting of that week happened on Friday afternoon in Sloan Whitaker's office. Denise said the meeting was not necessary. My father asked whether I was certain. I was. Sloan had not created Mason's character, but she was helping him reward it. I wanted to look at the woman whose future had apparently required my disappearance and determine whether she understood the price being paid on her behalf. Blue Ridge Regional's foundation offices occupied a renovated brick building across from the hospital. The lobby displayed photographs of ribbon cuttings, charity runs, and smiling donors holding oversized checks. Sloane's assistant told me she had no appointment available. "Tell her Evelyn Carter is here," I said. "Tell her I have photographs taken inside my house." The assistant's expression remained professional, but she disappeared quickly. 2 minutes later, Sloane opened the inner door. She was 36, tall, with dark blonde hair, and the composed confidence of someone who had never entered a room wondering whether she belonged there. Her cream blouse, narrow gold watch, and simple black trousers probably cost more than my entire outfit, but nothing about her was flashy. Sloane did not display wealth. She wore it as an assumption. 5 minutes, she said. Her office overlooked the hospital's new construction site. On the wall behind her desk hung a rendering of the future Women's Health Center. I sat without being invited. Sloane closed the door. "I assume this is about Mason." "It is about my husband, yes." She did not react to the word. "Mason told me the marriage had been over for months." "Did he tell you we heard our baby's heartbeat 3 weeks ago?" A small pause. "He said the pregnancy was unexpected. It was planned." Her eyes changed, but only slightly. I placed 3 photographs on her desk. The first showed her in my kitchen. The second showed her beneath my Christmas tree on Thanksgiving weekend. The third was the Lisbon reservation. She looked at them, then at me. "I am not going to apologize for a relationship Mason entered after he had emotionally left yours." "He had not emotionally left when he asked me to stop taking birth control." Sloane's jaw tightened. "He said you used the pregnancy to prevent the separation." "He filed before telling me." "How exactly did I use information I did not have?" She leaned back. "Evie, I know this is painful, but Mason has been deeply unhappy. He described a home where he was constantly managing your moods, your insecurity, your dependence." I placed the Lisbon reservation on her desk and set my phone beside it open to the bank alert. "Mason planned this trip for the week after your father's announcement," I said. "He scheduled $72,000 to leave our joint savings 2 days before we were supposed to discuss the separation." Sloane studied the screen, but her face remained guarded. "He told me the money was committed to the clinic campaign. The transfer was going to an account in his name." "That still does not tell me what happened inside your marriage." "No," I said. "It tells you he lies when the truth interferes with timing." I showed her the photograph taken in my kitchen on Thanksgiving afternoon. For the first time, she looked uncomfortable. "He said the house was already effectively his. I was across town cooking dinner for his family. Mason said you had agreed to live separately. 3 weeks ago, he held my hand while we listened to the heartbeat of the baby we planned." Sloane folded her arms. "A planned pregnancy does not prove a healthy marriage. It proves he was willing to promise one life while arranging another." She looked toward the construction site outside her window. Cranes moved slowly above the Future Women's Center, lifting steel into place, while we argued about a man who had built nothing without standing on someone else. "There is a woman named Olivia Grant," I said. "She dated Mason for almost 4 years. Their daughter is 4. He has never met her." Sloane turned back sharply. "That is not true." "It is. Mason told me Olivia had been obsessed with him after the breakup. And he told you I was unstable. He said you had become dependent and volatile." The words hurt, but not because I believed them anymore. They hurt because Sloane had repeated them with the confidence of someone who thought she was describing facts. "I am not asking you to accept my version because I am his wife," I said. I am asking you to notice that every woman becomes defective the moment she threatens the next future he wants. Sloane's face hardened. You came here to make me feel ashamed. I came because shame is still better than finding out after he has used your name, your father, and your work. I wrote Olivia's number on the back of one of my recipe cards. She can decide whether to speak to you. I will not hand you her private papers. Mason has already treated enough women's lives like material he owns. Sloane did not reach for the card. My father has vetted Mason thoroughly. Your father vetted the man Mason performs at donor dinners. Her eyes narrowed. And what exactly do you think Mason wants from me? I could have said promotion, money, access. Instead, I answered with a question. If Frank Whitaker were not your father, would Mason still be taking you to Lisbon the week after the leadership announcement? She stood. This meeting is over. I rose and collected my phone. Ask him why the reservation says no public photographs until the filing is complete. Ask him why he did not tell you the baby was planned. Ask him what he calls women after they stop helping him move forward. You are trying to destroy him because he chose me. No, I said. I am refusing to let him destroy me because he chose an opportunity. I left the recipe card on the corner of her desk and walked out. In the parking lot, my hands shook too badly to start the car. I sat with both palms against the steering wheel until the trembling eased. Being afraid did not make the meeting a mistake. It only meant the room had mattered. Sloane did not call me. She did not call Olivia. For 4 days, she defended Mason to her father, to the foundation director, and I later learned to herself. She wanted my visit to be the behavior of a rejected wife, because that explanation allowed her to remain the woman who had been chosen rather than the woman who had been positioned. Mason helped the truth along by assuming she would never challenge him. When Sloane asked to see the complete Lisbon budget, he told her the details were too complicated and that Frank had already approved them. When she asked why I believed the pregnancy was planned, he said I had become unreliable about dates. When she asked whether Lily existed, he did not say no. He said Olivia had always been dangerous. That answer stayed with her. 2 nights later, Mason left a tablet at Sloane's townhouse. A message appeared on the locked screen from his college friend Aaron. Still using the bridge after Frank announces. Sloane knew the passcode because Mason had given it to her months earlier, back when shared access made her feel trusted. She read backward. Aaron, you actually marrying Sloane? Mason eventually, if it keeps Frank comfortable. No rush once the title is mine. Another exchange mentioned me. Mason Evie made me look stable when I needed it. She was good for that stage. Aaron and the baby. Mason Diane is handling the pressure. Sloane later told me she read that sentence 5 times. Not because it was difficult to understand, but because understanding it changed the role she had assigned herself. She was not the great love who had rescued Mason from an unhappy marriage. She was the next useful stage. Even then, she did not call me immediately. Shame made her quiet before conscience made her brave. Mason did. At 7:06 that evening, he sent a text. You had no right to ambush Sloane at work. Another followed. You are now actively damaging my professional life. This will matter when your judgment is evaluated. Then, stop communicating with Olivia. You do not know what kind of person she is. I replied for the first time since the hospital. I know exactly what kind of person she is. She is the mother of your daughter. He called immediately. I answered and turned on the recorder. I had set my phone to preserve the call after Denise told me not to provoke him or argue beyond what I needed to ask. Do not ever write that again, Mason said. Is Lily your daughter? Olivia claims a great many things. Is she? That situation was resolved years ago. By your mother offering money. His breathing changed. You are allowing a vindictive stranger to manipulate you. I saw the statement. You saw a piece of paper Olivia kept because she has been waiting for leverage. She kept it because your mother left it in her house. Mason lowered his voice. Evie, listen to me. You are pregnant, overwhelmed, and surrounded by people feeding your fear. Come home. We can sit down privately and make a reasonable plan. You told me to leave. I told you to take space. Your mother brought a suitcase. She was trying to help. You told me to end the pregnancy. I told you to consider reality. Every harmful act became softer when Mason repeated it. Not abandonment, space. Not expulsion, help. Not an abortion demand, reality. I have considered reality, I said. Then stop turning this into revenge. I froze a joint account you planned to empty. That money was allocated. For Lisbon, silence. Then anger finally entered his voice. You went through my computer. I collected my work drive from our house. You stole private information. You stored a recording of me crying in a folder labeled with my initials. That recording proves my concerns. No, it proves I trusted my husband. The line went quiet. When Mason spoke again, his voice was cold. You have no idea what you are doing. You depended on that. I ended the call. My whole body shook afterward. Mom came upstairs carrying a bowl of soup and found me sitting on the floor beside the sofa. She set the bowl down and sat beside me. Did he scare you? Yes. Did you do what you needed to do? Yes. Then be scared for a while, it will pass. She did not tell me I was brave. She gave fear a place to sit without letting it take the whole room. The following morning, Denise called. Sloan forwarded the document you left to her father. How do you know? Frank Whitaker contacted hospital compliance and asked for a review of Mason's community partnership files. Dr. Chen was asked whether she had ever filed concerns. My heart quickened. What did she say? The truth. Will Mason know? Soon. What happens now? People who protected him because he looked useful will decide whether he still looks useful. I hated how accurate that sounded. 2 days later, Blue Ridge Regional announced that the vice president appointment would be delayed. The public notice called it a scheduling change. Mason knew better. He arrived at Carter Hardware after closing that night. The store lights were still on. Dad was in the stockroom. Mom was counting the register. I sat at the break room table, editing a photograph of cornbread. The bell above the front door rang. We had forgotten to lock it. Mason walked in wearing the same charcoal jacket he had worn the morning he served me papers. He looked tired, but carefully tired, the kind of tired he would want someone to notice. Evie, he said. Dad came out of the stockroom. Mason glanced at him. I need to speak to my wife privately. Dad stopped beside the paint counter. She decides what she needs. Mason looked at me. Please. I stood. We can talk here. His eyes moved toward my parents. This is a marriage, not a town meeting. It stopped being private when your mother, your girlfriend, and your family group chat joined it. Mom closed the register drawer. Mason's face tightened. He lowered his voice. Frank Whitaker postponed the announcement because Sloan gave him a document you stole from Olivia. I did not steal it. You are destroying years of work. Your work included lying to 3 women. You don't understand what is at stake. I understand exactly what is at stake. That is why the money is frozen and the baby is safe. For a moment, something hard appeared behind his eyes. Then he changed tactics. His shoulders softened. His voice broke slightly. I handled this badly. Dad did not move. Mom watched without expression. Mason stepped closer. I was under enormous pressure. Sloan's family, the promotion, the clinic launch, I panicked. I should never have let Diane speak to you that way. You sent her. I asked her to help you pack. You gave me an abortion clinic number. He glanced toward my parents as if embarrassed by my lack of discretion. We do not have to discuss that in front of them. Yes, we do. His jaw tightened again. I believed ending the pregnancy might prevent a child from growing up inside conflict. You already have a child growing up without you. The store became silent. Mason looked toward the front windows, then back at me. Olivia made her choice. Lily did not. That situation is legally uncertain. You mean emotionally inconvenient. His face changed. He heard his own logic return to him. Mason stepped closer and spoke so quietly my parents had to strain to hear. If you withdraw the complaints, tell Sloan you exaggerated and release the bank hold. I will revise the separation terms. You can keep the house for 2 years. I will cover medical expenses. We can create a generous arrangement for the baby. A generous arrangement. As if he were negotiating a sponsorship package. And if I don't, he held my eyes. Then this becomes harder for everyone. Dad moved 1 step forward. Mason noticed. I raised my hand slightly and Dad stopped. That mattered too. He let me hold the moment. Mason, I said, did you schedule $72,000 to leave our joint account? He looked at me for a long second. That money was going toward obligations. Did you schedule it? Yes, because you do not understand the financial commitments connected to my role. Did you plan to use part of it for Lisbon? The Lisbon trip was professional. with Sloan after your promotion announcement with a note saying no public photographs. His face went pale, not because he had suddenly developed shame, because he understood I had enough detail to make denial useless. You are recording this, he said. I did not answer. He looked around the break room at the old refrigerator, the bulletin board, my father's work shirt, my mother's hand resting on the register key. This was not a room Mason could charm. There was no title to gain here, no donor to impress, only people who knew the cost of what he had done. He turned toward the door. Before leaving, he looked back at me. You will regret letting your family turn you against me. I felt the baby still too small to kick existing quietly inside me. No, I said. I regret how long you convinced me that standing beside you meant standing against myself. Mason left. Dad locked the door behind him. Mom placed the soup she had brought earlier into the microwave. The store returned to ordinary sounds, the hum of lights, the tick of the old wall clock, the soft spin of the microwave tray. My hands were steady. That surprised me until I realized the fear had changed sides. By Monday morning, Mason had stopped calling me and started calling everyone around me. He called my father twice. Dad answered once, listened for less than a minute, and said, "My daughter has counsel. Do not use me as a side door." Then he hung up. Mason called my mother at the store and told her I was making decisions while emotionally compromised. Mom replied, "She made the decision to stop you from taking her money. That sounds clear to me." He called Dr. Chen's office. I learned later that he asked whether she had discussed confidential hospital matters with me. Dr. Chen told him that she had discussed my health, her own observations, and nothing she was ashamed to repeat. He called Olivia. That call lasted 14 seconds. She answered. He said her name. She said, "Do not contact me again unless it concerns Lily and comes through the proper channel." Then she ended it. The next morning, Olivia filed a request for paternity testing and child support. She told me over coffee in the hardware store break room. "I almost did it 4 years ago," she said. Then Diane came with the check, and Mason started telling people I was chasing him. I was exhausted. I wanted him gone more than I wanted anything from him. What changed? Olivia looked down at the photograph of Lily she had placed beside her mug. In it, Lily wore a yellow raincoat and held a worm in one palm with the solemn pride of a scientist. I realized truth and access are not the same thing. I can establish the truth without inviting Mason into her heart. A court cannot make someone a father in the ways that matter. But Lily should never have to wonder whether her mother was afraid to name what happened. I reached across the table and touched her hand. No matter what happens, she has you. Olivia gave a small smile. She also has Jasmine, my parents, 2 teachers who spoil her, and a neighbor who buys her loud toys on purpose. She is not lacking family. That sentence stayed with me. Family was not a man's name on a birth certificate. Family was the collection of people who kept showing up after the dramatic part was over. On Tuesday, Blue Ridge Regional placed Mason on administrative leave. The hospital's statement said the leave concerned an internal review of procurement expense reports and conduct during community clinic projects. Denise explained the practical meaning in one sentence. They found enough to stop trusting him while they look for the rest. Dr. Chen later told me what had happened inside the review. 2 former clinic coordinators agreed to speak after learning Mason was no longer in a position to affect their jobs. One described how he had blamed her for missing equipment he had failed to order. Another produced messages in which Mason threatened to tell supervisors she was emotionally unsuited for public-facing work after she challenged his numbers. The phrase made my stomach turn. Emotionally unsuited, unstable, difficult, different women, same eraser. The finance department also found that Mason had charged Dinner's hotel rooms and part of the Lisbon deposit to a hospital foundation account. Some expenses were legitimate. Others were attached to events that never occurred. Sloane's name appeared on several reservations. This was the point where Frank Whitaker stopped viewing the situation as a messy romance and began viewing it as a threat to his family's reputation. He requested a private meeting with Sloane and Mason. Sloane attended. Mason was not invited. 2 hours after that meeting, Sloane removed every photograph of Mason from her social media accounts. By evening, Diane had removed the foundation luncheon post. Deleting photographs did not erase the screenshots. But I noticed something else for the first time. The Reed family group chat went silent. No hearts. No finally. No future they were proud to be building. Silence looks different when people are deciding which side of a falling person they were ever truly on. Diane came to Carter Hardware on Wednesday afternoon. She arrived during the slow hour between lunch and the after-work rush, wearing a camel coat and carrying the same cream handbag she had brought to my house. Mom saw her through the front window and came upstairs to find me. "You do not have to speak to her. I know. Do you want us nearby?" "Yes." I went downstairs. Diane stood beside the display of garden gloves, looking profoundly out of place among bags of compost and handwritten sale signs. Dad remained behind the register. Mom organized seed packets within hearing distance. Diane looked at my stomach, though there was still almost nothing to see. It was the first time she had done that since learning I was pregnant. "I was hoping we could talk privately," she said. "We can talk here." Her eyes moved toward my parents. "This family seems to have abandoned the idea of discretion. This family did not enter my house with a suitcase." Diane's mouth tightened. "I regret that morning." "Which part?" "The way it was handled. Not what she did. How it looked." She took a breath. "Mason is under extraordinary pressure. Sloan has ended the relationship. Frank has withdrawn his support. The hospital is reviewing matters that have nothing to do with your marriage because you involved people who do not understand the context. The nurses understand the context. Disgruntled employees always have stories. Olivia understands it." At her name, Diane's composure shifted. "Olivia has spent years waiting for an opportunity to punish him. She spent years raising his child. That paternity has never been established. You offered her $15,000 to say it was not true." For one brief second, Diane looked toward my father. She had not expected him to know. "I tried to prevent a destructive situation from following my son for the rest of his life." "A child is not a destructive situation. You have no idea what it is like to watch a gifted young man lose opportunities because women make emotional decisions." There it was. The family doctrine. Mason's ambition was a fact of nature. Women's lives were weather damage. I asked, "Did you know about Lily before you came to my house?" Diane hesitated. "Yes." "Did you think about her when you told me Mason needed a different kind of wife?" "That is unrelated." "It is exactly related." Her voice sharpened. "Evie, you are not listening. Mason can still recover from this if people stop feeding the scandal. You can protect your child's future by helping him keep his career." "My child's future does not depend on Mason being rewarded. It depends on income, insurance, stability." "No, it depends on adults who do not call her a problem." Diane stepped closer. "I am offering you a chance to calm this down. Tell the hospital the stress affected your perception. Tell Sloan you misunderstood the timeline. Encourage Olivia to withdraw her claim. Mason will agree to support you generously." Mom stopped touching the seed packets. Dad's hand rested flat on the register. "I said you came here to buy another woman's silence." Diane's face went pale. "I came here to protect my family." "So did I." The sentence ended the conversation. Diane stared at me for a long moment, perhaps waiting for the version of me who would soften to make her more comfortable. That version did not arrive. She turned and walked toward the door. Before leaving, she said, "You will understand one day that dignity does not pay bills." Dad answered before I could. "No," he said. "But losing it costs more than most people can afford." Diane left. The bell above the door gave one bright, ordinary ring. Mom came over and took my hand. Dad looked at the glass until Diane's card disappeared. Then he returned to the customer invoice he had been writing. Life does not always pause after the right line is spoken. Sometimes a delivery still needs checking. A register still needs balancing. Someone still comes in asking which screw fits a cabinet hinge. That ordinary continuation saved me more than applause would have. On Thursday, Sloan called. Her voice was stripped of the polished certainty from our office meeting. "I need to show you something." We met at a coffee shop near the river, not at the hospital. Sloan wore no jewelry except small earrings. Her hair was tied back. She looked less expensive and more human. She placed her phone on the table. "I asked Mason directly why he had kept the pregnancy from me," she said. He told me you had invented the plan to have a child after sensing he was leaving. That is not true. I know. She opened a message thread. The conversation was between Mason and one of his college friends, Aaron. Sloan had found it on a tablet Mason left at her townhouse. Mason Frank is finally ready to announce the role. Aaron and Sloan. Mason, she is the bridge. She understands that. Aaron, you marrying her. Mason, eventually, if it keeps Frank comfortable. No rush once the title is mine. Aaron, what about Evie? Mason, she was useful when I needed stability. Now she is making the exit difficult. Aaron, baby. Mason, I gave her the clinic number. If she chooses drama, that's on her. I stopped reading. Sloane's eyes were fixed on the river beyond the window. He called me the bridge, she said. I thought of how Mason had called me stable, then unstable, depending on which description served him. I am sorry, I said. She looked at me sharply. Do not feel sorry for me. I knew he was married. I accepted his explanation because it made what I wanted easier. You were right about that. It was not a full apology. It was honest enough to matter. Why are you showing me? Because my father wants this handled quietly. He is concerned about the foundation. The hospital wants Mason to resign in exchange for a neutral statement. Diane wants everyone to stop speaking. For the first time in my life, every person around me agrees silence is the practical choice. She gave a bitter smile. I suddenly understand how practical can become another word for cowardly. What are you going to do? The foundation dinner is Saturday. My father planned to announce the Women's Center and Mason's promotion. The promotion is canceled, but the event is still happening. There will be hospital employees, donors, families, local press. My stomach tightened. I am not interested in humiliating him for entertainment. Neither am I. Sloan turned the phone toward me again. I am going to tell the truth about why the appointment changed. Not every detail. Enough. The former coordinators deserve not to be called disgruntled. Olivia deserves not to be called obsessed. You deserve not to be called unstable. And your father, he will hate it. Will he stop you? He may try. Sloan looked directly at me. I want you there. I almost said no. Public scenes had been Mason's territory. He understood rooms, timing, reputations. I understood kitchens, camera angles, the quiet patience of food becoming what heat asked of it. Then I remembered the hospital hallway, Sloane's hand on his sleeve, Mason looking at my wheelchair as if I had embarrassed him by bleeding where powerful people could see. Perhaps the room did not belong to him simply because he had learned how to perform inside it. I will come, I said. Olivia, too. That is her decision. Sloane nodded. There is one more thing. Mason believes the dinner is where my father will restore the announcement. Diane told him Frank only needs reassurance that the situation is controlled. He thinks he is still getting promoted. Yes. Why would your father let him think that? Sloane looked down at her coffee. Because my father is still deciding whether public truth is more expensive than private deception. That was the difference between our families. My father had asked what I needed before calculating the cost. Frank Whitaker calculated cost before deciding what truth he could afford. I told Olivia about the dinner that evening. She listened quietly. I do not want Lily there, she said immediately. Of course not. I will not let her first sight of Mason happen in a room full of strangers. I agree. But I will come. Are you sure? No, she said. I am done waiting to feel sure before doing something necessary. Dr. Chen agreed to attend because she had already purchased a ticket months earlier. Jasmine would stay with Lily. My parents did not need invitations. Carter Hardware had donated materials for a healing garden beside the new clinic, and the foundation had given them 2 seats at a community table. Mom took my blue dress from the garment bag where it had hung since Mason's last donor dinner. You do not have to wear something connected to him, she said. It is connected to me. I paid for it. She smiled. Good answer. Saturday afternoon, I stood in the apartment bathroom and looked at myself in the mirror. The dress still fit. My pregnancy remained mostly invisible beneath the fabric, but I knew exactly where the baby was. I wore my grandmother's small pearl earrings and no wedding ring. When I came downstairs, Dad waited near the front door, in a suit he wore only to funerals, weddings, and bank meetings. Mom wore a dark green dress and carried a shawl. Dad looked at me for a moment. You ready, Bug? No. He opened the door. Neither am I. We went anyway. The Blue Ridge Foundation dinner, took place in the ballroom of the Asheville Civic Center, a large rectangular room made elegant with rented lights, white tablecloths, and centerpieces of mountain greenery. A banner near the stage displayed a rendering of the new Women's Health Center. Beneath it, in smaller letters, were the names of donors, contractors, and community partners. Carter Hardware and Garden appeared near the bottom. Dad found our name first. He touched it with one finger and said nothing. We had donated cedar soil tools and 3 weekends of labor for the healing garden. The contribution was modest compared with the Whitaker Foundation's millions, but it was real. My parents had given what they actually had. The ballroom filled slowly. Doctors greeted donors. Hospital administrators moved from table to table. Local reporters waited near the back. A string quartet played music everyone recognized and nobody listened to. Mason stood near the stage. He wore a black suit and the blue tie I had given him on our first anniversary. For one disorienting second, he looked exactly like the man I had married. Then he turned toward Diane and I saw the careful tension in his face. He was waiting for his life to return to the plan. Diane wore silver and stood beside him with one hand on his arm. Mason's sister Claire and 2 Reed cousins occupied a nearby table. When Claire saw me, her eyes widened. She leaned toward Diane and whispered. Diane turned. Her expression did not change, but her hand tightened around Mason's sleeve. He followed her gaze. Across the room, our eyes met. Mason looked first at me, then at my parents, then at Olivia standing beside Dr. Chen. Color left his face. Not completely, just enough. Olivia wore a simple black dress and carried the cream envelope in one hand. She had left Lily with Jasmine and their mother. Her shoulders were straight, but I saw her thumb moving over the envelope's edge again and again. Dr. Chen stood beside her in a navy suit. 2 former clinic coordinators sat at the table behind them. This was not a mob. No one had come to shout. That was what frightened Mason. People who planned to shout could be called hysterical. People who arrived calm separately with the same story were harder to erase. Sloan entered through a side door with Frank Whitaker. Frank was 70, silver-haired, broad-shouldered, and accustomed to rooms changing temperature when he entered. Sloan walked half a step behind him carrying no notes. Frank saw Olivia. Then he saw me. His expression hardened. He said something to Sloan. She answered without looking at him. A Foundation employee approached Mason and asked him to take his seat. Mason spoke briefly to her, probably asking about the announcement. She shook her head and moved away. Diane leaned close to him. I could not hear the words, but I recognized the rhythm. Reassurance shaped like instruction. Control the room. Stay composed. Move forward. Dad placed a hand against the back of my chair as we sat. You can leave at any point, he said. So can you. He looked toward Mason. I'm comfortable. Mom passed me a bread roll. Eat before the speeches. Even at the edge of a public reckoning, she noticed I had skipped lunch. Dinner began. Salad, chicken, green beans arranged in bundles no real family would ever bother tying. The Foundation director welcomed everyone and spoke about access, dignity, and women receiving care close to home. Each word struck me differently than it would have 2 weeks earlier. Access, dignity, care. Institutions loved those words. The test was whether the people inside them recognized the words when they became inconvenient. Frank Whitaker was introduced after dessert. He walked to the podium while the room applauded. Behind him, the screen showed photographs of clinic construction volunteers, doctors, and donors. Frank spoke confidently about regional growth and community legacy. He thanked hospital leadership. He thanked the construction team. He thanked Sloan for guiding the project. Then he paused. Mason sat straighter. Diane lifted her chin. This evening, Frank said we had intended to make an announcement concerning expanded leadership within the Foundation's Community Development Division. The room became quieter. Recent questions have made it necessary to delay that announcement until a review is complete. Mason's face tightened. Frank continued quickly, attempting to move forward. Our mission is larger than any one person, and Sloan stood. Dad. The microphone carried the word farther than she intended. Frank looked at her. She walked toward the stage. The Foundation director rose halfway from her chair, uncertain whether to intervene. Sloane held out her hand for the microphone. Frank did not give it to her immediately. For several seconds, father and daughter stood beside the podium in a silent argument visible to hundreds of people. Then Frank released the microphone. Sloane faced the room. "I asked to speak tonight because the announcement was not delayed by scheduling," she said. "It was canceled because the person selected for the role misrepresented his conduct, his relationships, and his use of foundation resources." A low movement passed through the ballroom chairs, shifting breaths, drawn attention sharpening. Mason stood. "Sloane, this is not the place." She looked directly at him. "That is what everyone keeps telling women when the truth becomes inconvenient. Not here, not now, not publicly, not in a way that affects him." Diane reached for Mason's wrist. He pulled free. Sloane continued. "I had a relationship with Mason Reed while he was married. I accepted his claim that the marriage had ended in everything but paperwork. That was false. I accepted his claim that his wife used a planned pregnancy to prevent him from leaving. That was false. I also learned that Mason described me privately as a bridge to a promotion connected to my father." The room went completely still. Frank stepped toward her. "Sloane." She turned slightly. "You taught me our name meant responsibility. This can be handled internally." "It has been handled internally. That is why we are here." Dr. Chen lowered her eyes for one moment. She understood that sentence better than most people in the room. Mason moved toward the stage. "This is a personal dispute," he said. "Sloane is upset and being influenced by people with their own motives." There it was. The reversal. Sloane was no longer useful, so Sloane became upset. Sloane continued before Mason could redirect the room. "This is not only a personal dispute. During the hospital review, 2 former clinic coordinators described the same retaliation. When they questioned Mason's numbers, he called them emotional and tried to damage their credibility." Dr. Chen confirmed that she had previously submitted a witness statement. Dr. Chen stood only long enough to say, "That is accurate." The 2 former coordinators rose behind her. Neither gave a speech. Their presence was enough. Mason looked around the room. "This is coordinated," he said. "You can see that." Mason looked toward Frank. "This is coordinated," he said. "You can see that." Frank's expression had become unreadable. Mason turned toward the tables. "My wife is going through a medically and emotionally difficult pregnancy. She has collected people who resent me and created a narrative." I stood. My father's hand moved from the chair but did not touch me. He let me decide whether to speak. "Mason," I said. "The ballroom was so quiet I did not need the microphone." He looked at me. "You told me not to create a scene when I arrived at the hospital bleeding." A murmur moved across the room. His face changed. "Evie, please. You gave me the number of a clinic and told me to end a planned pregnancy because a baby would complicate your promotion." Diane rose. "This is a private medical matter." I looked at her. "It stopped being private when you unlocked my house with a hidden key, brought me a suitcase and told me another woman was better suited to your son's future." Every face at the read table went still. Claire looked down. One cousin covered her mouth. Diane's cheeks flushed. "You are twisting a painful conversation." Olivia stood. "No," she said. "She's describing a familiar one." Mason turned toward her. For the first time, I saw genuine panic enter his eyes. Olivia walked into the aisle carrying the cream envelope. "My name is Olivia Grant," she said. "I lived with Mason for 2 years and dated him for nearly 4. He left 3 weeks before moving to Asheville. 6 weeks later, I learned I was pregnant." Mason's voice sharpened. "Olivia, do not do this." She stopped several yards from him. "Our daughter is 4 years old. Her name is Lily. You have never met her." The ballroom reacted not loudly but physically. People turned toward Mason. Someone near the back whispered, "Oh my God." Olivia lifted the envelope. "Your mother came to my apartment with a statement for me to sign denying you were Lily's father. She brought a $15,000 cashier's check." Diane shook her head. "That was an attempt to settle an uncertain claim." Olivia looked at her. "You said a child would damage Mason's future." "I said the situation would." "You left the check on my table." Frank stepped away from the podium. He looked at Diane as if seeing a structure inside the scandal he had not expected. Sloane held up her phone. "I have messages from Mason acknowledging the child and describing Olivia as a problem he believed his mother had handled." Mason's head snapped toward her. You went through my private messages. The accusation echoed his words to me. Sloane almost smiled. Interesting, isn't it? Privacy matters to you only after the evidence belongs to someone else. A few people in the room made small sounds of agreement. Mason's composure fractured. This is insane. All of you standing here rehearsing this, Evie has manipulated everyone because she cannot accept that our marriage failed. I walked toward the stage. Not quickly. I did not want anger carrying me faster than dignity could follow. When I reached the open space near Mason, I stopped. You told me I had been useful when you needed stability, I said. You told your friend Sloane was a bridge. You told people Olivia was unstable. You told nurses they were emotional when they questioned you. Every woman is valuable until she stops serving your next step. That is not what happened. It is exactly what happened. He glanced around the room and lowered his voice. Think about our child. Do you want this to be the story attached to her father? The question was meant to shame me into silence. Instead, it gave me the clearest answer I had spoken yet. I want her to know her mother did not protect a false image at the expense of the truth. Mason stared at me. You are ruining my life. No, I spoke quietly. I am refusing to keep paying for the life you built by using ours. The sentence landed in the silence. Mason looked toward Frank again. Frank, you know my work. You know what I have built for this network. Frank's face had hardened. What you built is now under financial review. I can explain the expenses. You charged a private Lisbon deposit to a foundation account. It was connected to donor outreach. There was no donor event in Lisbon. Mason's mouth opened, then closed. Frank continued. You also used my daughter's relationship to create the appearance that your appointment had already been approved. It had not. Diane stepped toward Frank. This is being exaggerated because emotions are high. Frank looked at her. Mrs. Reed, your son's employer is reviewing financial records. 2 former partners describe the same conduct. Staff describe retaliation. Your involvement in attempting to silence the mother of his child has just been stated in front of witnesses. Which part do you believe requires less emotion? Diane had no answer. For years, her calm had controlled rooms because everyone else felt rude challenging it. Now the room understood calm could be a costume too. The foundation director approached the microphone. This program will pause for 10 minutes. No one moved. Mason reached for my arm. Dad crossed the space between us before Mason touched me. He did not shove him, he did not threaten him. He simply placed himself at my side. Do not, Dad said. 2 words. Mason stopped. He looked at my father, then at my mother who had joined us then, at Olivia, Dr. Chen Sloane, and the nurses. The people he had counted on being isolated were standing in one place. That was the true reversal. Not the canceled promotion. Not the investigation. Not the public embarrassment. Isolation had been Mason's strongest tool. He had told each woman a different story and trusted shame to keep us in separate rooms. The moment those rooms opened into each other, he lost control. A hospital security officer approached Frank and spoke quietly. Frank nodded. Mason heard enough to understand. You're removing me, Frank said. You are on administrative leave. You were not authorized to attend as a representative of Blue Ridge after the notice delivered yesterday. I was invited. Your invitation was tied to the canceled appointment. Mason looked at Sloane. You let me come here knowing this. She held his eyes. You let your pregnant wife walk into a hospital bleeding while you stood beside me. We all have moments we will have to live with. Security did not take Mason by the arms. They did not need to. One officer walked beside him toward the exit. As he passed me, he said under his breath, You think these people will stay once the drama is over? I looked at my parents. Mom held my coat. Dad stood close enough that I could feel the warmth of his shoulder. Olivia had driven from Charlotte. Dr. Chen had risked her position. Jasmine was at home caring for a child Mason had never met. They already stayed through the part you left, I said. Mason walked away. Diane followed several steps behind him. At the Reed family table, Claire remained seated. She was crying silently. When Diane called her name, Claire did not move. That was the first visible crack in the family's obedience. The dinner never fully resumed. Some guests left. Others gathered in small groups. Reporters spoke with foundation representatives. Frank disappeared into a side room with hospital leadership. I did not speak to the press. Neither did Olivia. We had told the truth to the people who needed to hear it. We were not obligated to turn pain into content for strangers. Sloane found us near the coat check. Her face looked exhausted. "My father is furious," she said. "Are you okay?" I asked. She gave a short, surprised laugh. "You are asking me that?" "Yes." She looked toward the ballroom. "I will be. I have spent most of my life believing being protected meant being loved. Tonight, I learned protection can also mean being kept useful." Olivia nodded slowly. "Learn it once," she said. "Some of us needed more than one lesson." Sloane looked at her. "I am sorry." Olivia did not rush to comfort her. "Be different," she said. "That will mean more." Outside, the night air was cold and clean. Dad drove because my legs felt unsteady. Mom sat beside me in the back seat, one hand wrapped around mine. No one spoke for the first 10 minutes. Then Dad asked, "Anybody hungry?" I started laughing. It came out half laugh, half sob. Mom laughed too. We stopped at an all-night diner and ordered pancakes, eggs, and coffee. At 1 in the morning, still wearing formal clothes, we sat beneath fluorescent lights, while Dad complained that the syrup containers were sticky and Mom stole bacon from my plate. That meal mattered more to me than anything served beneath chandeliers. At the foundation dinner, Mason had lost the room. At the diner, I understood I had never lost my family. The public part ended that night. The consequences did not. On Monday, Blue Ridge Regional terminated Mason's employment. The official statement cited misuse of foundation funds, conflicts of interest, and retaliatory conduct toward staff. It did not mention me, Olivia, or the child he had tried to persuade me not to have. Institutions prefer clean language even when the truth arrives covered in fingerprints. Frank Whitaker resigned as foundation chair 2 weeks later. The announcement said he wanted to focus on family and allow new leadership to guide the Women's Health Center. Sloane remained involved in the project, but no longer through a title created by her father. She asked the 2 former nurses to join an advisory group that would review workplace complaints. "I heard about that from Dr. Chen. Do you trust her?" I asked. "Not yet," she said. "But trust is not the first requirement for change. Action is." That sounded right. Mason repaid the disputed travel charges through money from his private account. The Lisbon trip was canceled. The joint savings remained frozen until Denise arranged a written division. I received the money I had contributed plus the portion that belonged to me. The amount mattered because babies need housing, medical care, and diapers, but it did not feel like victory. Money can restore options. It cannot restore the mornings before you knew what someone was capable of. The bungalow was sold in early spring. Mason wanted to keep it at first. Then he learned he would have to refinance without the promotion and without access to our shared savings. He changed his mind within a week. I returned once to collect the last boxes. The rosemary beside the back steps had survived the winter. My mother had planted it on the day we moved in, pressing the soil around the roots with both hands, while Mason took a call in the driveway. I cut a small branch and carried it with me. I did not take the wedding photograph. I left it folded on the kitchen counter exactly where I had placed it. Some memories do not need to be destroyed. They simply stop deserving space in the new house. Olivia's paternity test confirmed what everyone already knew. Lily was Mason's daughter. He did not contest the result. He agreed to financial support after Denise's office connected Olivia with an attorney in Charlotte. Olivia decided against immediate visits. He asked for photographs, she told me. "What did you say?" I sent one school picture. Not because he earned it, because Lily may want to know one day that he had the chance to see who she was. How did he respond? He said she looked like him. Olivia shook her head, as if resemblance were participation. Diane sent Olivia a letter apologizing for the pressure and confusion surrounding their earlier conversation. She did not apologize for calling Lily a threat to Mason's future. Olivia returned the letter unopened. "I spent 4 years trying to interpret their careful words," she said. "I do not do that anymore." Diane wrote to me too. Her letter arrived in a cream envelope with my married name written across the front, Mrs. Evelyn Reed. I stared at it for a long time. Then I crossed out Reed wrote Carter above it and placed the envelope in a drawer without opening it. A month later, Claire Reed came to the hardware store. Mason's sister looked younger without the confidence of the family group around her. She stood near the register, twisting her car keys between both hands. "I owe you an apology," she said. I waited. Claire swallowed. "I knew about Sloan. Mason told us you had agreed to separate but were refusing to move because of the house. Mom said the pregnancy might not even be his." The cruelty of that lie still found a place to hurt. Did you believe her? I wanted to. Believing her meant I did not have to ask why everyone was celebrating while you disappeared. She looked down. "At Christmas, when Mom asked you to take the family photos, I knew it was wrong." I said nothing. That admission mattered more than a vague apology. "I cannot tell you it is okay," I said. "I know. What are you asking for?" "Nothing. I wanted you to hear me say I was part of it." Claire placed a small gift bag on the counter. Inside was the baby name book I had left at Diane's house after her birthday dinner. "I thought this belonged to you." "It does." She nodded. Before leaving, she said I left the family group chat. It was not redemption. It was a beginning. I learned during those months that boundaries do not have to sound angry to be real. I could accept Claire's apology without inviting her into the delivery room. I could acknowledge Diane's letters without reading them. I could communicate with Mason about medical information without discussing his loneliness, career mother, or regret. Mason regretted consequences long before he regretted harm. I knew the difference. He moved into a furnished apartment near the airport and began applying for development jobs outside North Carolina. Several weeks after the foundation dinner, he asked to meet me at a coffee shop. Denise said I did not have to go. Dr. Chen said stress mattered. My parents said they would support either choice. I agreed because I wanted one conversation in which Mason understood I was no longer waiting for him to define the ending. We met on a rainy afternoon. He looked thinner. His hair was longer at the sides. Without the hospital badge and tailored jacket, he seemed less important than I remembered. That startled me. Power had been part posture, part audience. Mason stirred coffee he did not drink. "I have an opportunity in London," he said. "Doing what?" "Consulting for a health development firm. It is not finalized." I nodded. "I may leave before the baby is born." "That is your decision." He looked at me as if the answer disappointed him. "I thought you would have more to say. You made leaving your language long before London appeared." He looked toward the window. "I know I handled things badly." Again the handling. Never the act. "You built a file to call me unstable," I said. "You recorded me while pretending to comfort me. You told me to end our child's life because a promotion mattered more. You allowed your mother to remove me from my home. You abandoned Lily. Those were not mistakes in presentation." Mason's face tightened. I was afraid. So was I. I felt trapped. "You filed papers before speaking to me. I knew you would make it emotional." "I am a human being, Mason. You did not marry a hallway you could pass through without touching anything." He looked down at his hands. For a moment, I saw something that might have been shame. Then he said, "Sloan has turned everyone against me." The moment passed. "No," I said. "Consequences introduced you to people who had stopped accepting your version." He leaned back. "What do you want me to do about the baby?" The question revealed everything still unchanged. He did not ask what the baby needed. He asked what role I wanted assigned to him. "I want you to follow the medical updates I send. I want you to provide the support required. I want you to decide with a counselor and not your mother whether you are capable of becoming a consistent parent. I will not use my daughter as the place where you practice being admired." His eyes lifted. Daughter. I had learned the sex at the anatomy scan 2 days earlier. Yes, something moved across his face. A daughter. For perhaps the first time the baby became specific to him. "Have you chosen a name?" "Not one I am sharing today." He looked hurt. That hurt no longer instructed me. When we stood to leave, Mason said, "I did love you." I believed he believed that. Perhaps he had loved the warmth of my home, the steadiness of my income, the way my family welcomed him, and the person he saw reflected in my trust. But love that requires another person to remain useful is not love strong enough to build a life on. "I loved you too," I said. "That is why what you did mattered." Then I left. Mason accepted the London job 2 months later. He departed before the baby was born. He posted a photograph from an airport lounge with the caption, "New Chapter." Diane liked it within a minute. I did not see the post myself. Claire mentioned it in an email and immediately apologized for mentioning it. By then, the phrase no longer had power over me. Mason could call every departure a new chapter. He still had not learned that a chapter is not new when the same person keeps repeating the same ending. My pregnancy continued safely. Dr. Chen monitored me more closely after the bleeding episode, but the baby grew exactly as she should. At each appointment, the heartbeat filled the room with the same fast certainty I had heard on the worst day of my life. Jasmine sometimes stopped by to say hello. She never brought hospital gossip. She brought practical things, a list of affordable bassinets, a recommendation for a pediatrician, a reminder to buy more burp cloths than I thought necessary. Olivia and I became friends slowly, not because shared pain automatically creates friendship. Sometimes it creates only recognition. Friendship came later through ordinary things. She sent me photographs of Lily's disastrous first attempt at baking muffins. I mailed Lily a child-sized garden tool set from the store. Olivia called when I could not decide whether to include rosemary in a white bean recipe. I called when Lily needed a costume for a school play, and Mom knew how to turn brown felt into convincing squirrel ears. The first time Olivia brought Lily to Hendersonville, we did not discuss Mason. Lily spent 2 hours in the garden center planting marigolds in a red pot. She named the plant Mayor Jr. after her stuffed rabbit. Dad showed her how to water the soil without drowning the roots. Watching them, I understood something I had been slow to learn. Legacy is not only what a parent leaves through blood or money. Legacy is the way a patient man kneels beside a child who is not related to him and teaches her to care for something living. The cookbook grew with my pregnancy. I changed the title from Sunday Food to The Table That Stays. My editor and Charlotte loved it. The book became more than recipes. Between them, I wrote short essays about meals carried upstairs, soup placed beside a frightened person diner, pancakes after midnight, and the difference between feeding someone and making sure they know the food has conditions attached. I did not write about Mason by name. I did not need to. The book was not revenge. It was evidence that my voice existed beyond what he had tried to record, label, and use. At 7 months pregnant, I moved from the apartment above the store into a small yellow duplex 3 blocks from my parents' house. It had 2 bedrooms, a square kitchen, and a porch that did not tilt. The rent was reasonable. The walls were plain. The second bedroom had 1 window facing east. Dad painted it a soft green. Mom hung simple white curtains. Olivia and Lily came for the baby shower. Dr. Chen stopped by after her shift. Jasmine brought a mountain of diapers and announced that decorative newborn shoes were a conspiracy. Sloan sent a gift but did not attend. It was a wooden box containing letters for my daughter, one for her first birthday, one for her first day of school, and one for the day she might ask why her father was absent. The letters were blank. A note on top said, "You should be the one to decide what truth belongs in these." I kept the box. My father built a bookshelf for the nursery from leftover cedar. On the bottom, where no one would see unless they turned it over, he wrote, "For the stories no one else gets to write for you." I cried when I found it. Not because I was sad, because healing sometimes hurts when it reaches a place pain had convinced you was permanently closed. Labor began at 3:40 on a Sunday morning. I woke to a deep tightening across my back and lay still until the second one came. The hospital bag had been ready for 3 weeks. I called Dr. Chen's office, then my parents. Dad answered on the second ring. "It's time," I said. "We're coming." No panic, no questions, just movement. At Blue Ridge Regional, Jasmine was on duty. She met me at the maternity entrance and smiled. Different arrival this time. Very different. Dr. Chen arrived before sunrise. Mom sat beside me. Dad occupied the corner with a crossword puzzle he never completed. Olivia drove from Charlotte after leaving Lily with Jasmine's mother, then spent most of the morning bringing ice chips and telling stories that had nothing to do with labor. They stayed. Hours passed. People shifted chairs, drank bad coffee, and took turns holding my hand. Nobody asked how long it would take. Nobody spoke about what the day cost them. My daughter was born at 2:16 in the afternoon. She weighed 7 pounds 4 ounces, had dark hair, a furious cry, and one tiny fist pressed beside her cheek. When the nurse placed her on my chest, the room changed. Not magically. The past did not vanish. Mason did not become irrelevant to every future question. But the center moved. For months, the story had revolved around what he rejected, what he tried to take, what he said was inconvenient. Now the center was a warm, breathing child who opened her eyes for 3 seconds and closed her fingers around mine. I named her Rosemary Carter. Rose for the plant beside the bungalow steps that survived the winter. Mary for my grandmother, whose picture frame I carried out of the house. Carter because a name should not be a reward given only to the person who caused a life to begin. A name can honor the people who helped that life remain safe. Dad came to the side of the bed and looked at her for a long time. "She's got your serious face," he said. "She is 10 minutes old." Still serious. Mom laughed and put one arm around me. Olivia stood near the window crying openly. Dr. Chen checked the monitor, asked 3 practical questions, and said, "Everything looks exactly right." The sentence returned me to the first ultrasound room. Then it had meant survival. Now it meant arrival. That evening, while Rosemary slept in the bassinet, an email appeared from my editor. The regional publisher had approved the table that stays for a full release across the Carolinas, with wider distribution possible if readers found it. The message included the final cover concept and a request for my signature. At the bottom of the agreement, I typed my full name, Evelyn Carter, the name I was born with, the name on my recipes, the name my daughter carried, the name no one had managed to remove. Mason called from London the following morning. I let it ring once before answering. "I heard she was born," he said. "Yes." "Is she healthy?" "Yes." "Can I see her?" I looked at Rosemary sleeping beside me. "I will send a photograph. When you return, we can discuss a safe and consistent plan with a counselor." He was silent. I wish I had been there. I did not tell him he could have been. Some truths do not need to be used as weapons. The person already lives inside them. "I need to rest," I said. "Evie." "Yes." "What did you name her?" "Rosemary Carter." He breathed out. "You did not use Reed." "No. That feels punitive." I almost smiled. "No, Mason, it feels inherited." I ended the call. In the weeks after we came home, my parents developed a rhythm around us. Dad arrived each morning before opening the store with coffee for me and a bottle already warmed if Rosemary was awake. Mom came in the afternoons with food and folded laundry while pretending she had only stopped by for 5 minutes. Olivia called every Sunday. Sometimes Lily sang to the baby through the phone. Jasmine visited with diapers. Dr. Chen checked on us at the 2-week appointment and reminded me that accepting help was not the same as surrendering independence. One evening, when Rosemary was nearly a month old, she cried for 40 minutes without any obvious reason. I walked the length of the living room, exhausted hair, unwashed dinner untouched. Dad arrived with a bag of groceries. He took one look at me and held out his arms. "Give her here. I can do it." "I know." That was why I handed her over. He walked slowly beneath the ceiling fan while Rosemary's cries softened against his work shirt. Mom heated soup. I sat at the table and ate with both hands free. No one told me I was dramatic. No one recorded me. No one measured my exhaustion as evidence of weakness. They simply carried what was heavy until I could carry it again. That is what family became for me. Not people who shared a name and protected the most ambitious person in the room. Not people who called silence respect while arranging someone else's disappearance. Family was the person who answered on the second ring. The nurse who protected 2 tiny socks from a stack of papers. The woman who told the truth after 4 years because silence had begun helping the wrong person. The father who stood beside me without speaking for me. The mother who noticed hunger in the middle of disaster. The doctor who said, "Follow me," and opened a door between women Mason had depended on keeping apart. I used to believe legacy was something impressive people built, so their names would remain on buildings, programs, or donor walls. Mason believed that too. Frank Whitaker believed it until the name on the wall began costing more than the truth. Now I think legacy is quieter. It is what people learn about their own worth after standing near you. It is whether your children feel safe telling you difficult things. It is whether love makes someone larger or trains them to disappear. It is the story your family tells when protecting you is no longer convenient. Mason wanted a future that looked important from the outside. I wanted a home where my daughter would never have to earn respect by being useful. In the end, only one of us built what we said we valued. There is a version of my life in which I called the clinic, signed the agreement, left the house quietly, and allowed Mason to explain me to everyone who remained. I came frighteningly close to living that version. I do not judge the woman I was that morning. She was not weak. She was shocked, pregnant, bleeding, and surrounded by people who had prepared their story before she knew there was a story to defend. But dignity began the moment I stopped asking Mason to confirm what I already knew. Self-worth returned each time I chose a boundary over an explanation. Respect returned when I understood I did not need every person to believe me. I needed to stop abandoning myself in order to make disbelief more comfortable. And real family did not save me by taking over. They saved me by staying close enough that I could stand up under my own name. 1 year later, Carter Hardware cleared the front seasonal display for my book launch. Dad argued that a hardware store was not the traditional place to launch a cookbook. Mom reminded him that the book had been written above the paint department, tested in the break room microwave, and financed partly by customers who kept asking why the owner's daughter was photographing cornbread beside the seed packets. So we moved the wheelbarrows, set up folding chairs, and stacked copies of The Table That Stays beneath a handwritten sign. Rosemary sat on Olivia's lap, wearing a yellow dress. Lily, now 5, handed out bookmarks she had decorated with purple stars. Jasmine arrived after her shift. Dr. Chen came directly from the hospital and stood near the back with a paper cup of coffee. Claire attended quietly and helped Mom refill plates without trying to make the day about forgiveness. Sloane sent flowers from the Healing Garden's opening ceremony. This time, Mom allowed them inside. The card contained one sentence. The center now has a policy requiring independent review of retaliation complaints. Thank you for refusing the quiet version. I placed the card beside the register. During the reading, I chose an essay near the middle of the book. It was about soup, not dramatic soup, not a recipe linked to a holiday or a perfect childhood memory. It was the white bean soup Mom had carried upstairs after Mason's first recorded phone call. The essay ended with a line I had written at 2 in the morning while Rosemary slept against my chest. Sometimes the meal that saves you is not the one that brings a family together. It is the one that reveals who was already there. When I looked up, Dad pretended to examine a ceiling light. Mom did not pretend anything. She wiped her eyes with the corner of a napkin. Afterward, people formed a line for signed copies. A teacher told me she had left a controlling marriage 10 years earlier. An older man bought 2 books and said one was for his daughter, who had stopped speaking to him after he defended her husband instead of her. A young mother whispered that she had spent years believing asking for help made her weak. I did not give any of them advice. I wrote their names carefully. Listening is not the smaller part of helping. Often, it is the first respectful thing another person receives. Near the end of the afternoon, Claire quietly asked whether she could hold Rosemary while I signed the final books. I watched her wait for my answer instead of assuming forgiveness gave her access. Yes, I said, for a few minutes. She took Rosemary carefully and stood beside Olivia and Lily. It was not a repaired family portrait. It was something more honest people, accepting that love did not erase consequences and boundaries, did not erase the possibility of change. That evening, after the chairs were folded and the store returned to its normal shape, Dad carried Rosemary upstairs. Mom wrapped leftover cake for Olivia and Lily. I stood alone for a moment beside the front counter. The building was quiet but not empty. My books sat where boxes of winter gloves usually went. The old wall phone hung beside the office door. Through the window, I could see the garden center lights glowing over rows of rosemary marigolds and cedar planters. Nothing about the scene would have impressed Mason when I first knew him. No donor wall, no title, no room waiting to applaud. Yet every part of it contained something he had spent his life chasing without understanding a name. People trusted work that fed others and a legacy built by staying. I turned off the front lights and climbed the stairs toward my daughter's laughter. There was a version of my life in which I called the clinic, signed the agreement, left the house quietly, and allowed Mason to explain me to everyone who remained. I came frighteningly close to living it. I do not judge the woman I was that morning. She was not weak. She was shocked, pregnant, bleeding, and surrounded by people who had prepared their story before she knew there was a story to defend. Dignity began when I stopped asking Mason to confirm what I already knew. Self-worth returned each time I chose a boundary over another explanation. Respect returned when I understood I did not need every person to believe me. I needed to stop abandoning myself to make their disbelief comfortable. My family did not save me by taking over. They stayed close enough that I could stand under my own name. That was the future I chose. So tell me in the comments, if your family had already replaced you in their story before telling you the truth, would you confront them publicly or walk away and build a life they could no longer control? And what makes someone family to you? Blood, a shared name, or the willingness to stay when loving you becomes inconvenient?